Alumni panel. What we're going to do, because of the unique format, we're originally going to try and do a panel in the round, and that obviously there's so many of you and so many of these wonderful people that joined us that we have to do a panel in the 180. So that's kind of like what we changed to. But as advertised, what we're going to be starting with first is a short 10-minute documentary filmed in 1973 at Atari. Second time this has been seen in public. It's called Games Computers Play. So we're kind of using that as an intro to the panel, and then we'll start the actual formal panel just right after that. So let me just get the lights in.
Well, I'd say 30 years to pretty much the present. The arcades have been relegated to the back rooms and the side streets, and generally been an unsavory type of place. What we want to do is bring the amusement game to age. If we can give it a new zip and a pizzazz, it's going to be financially successful, as well as, I think, a very serious part in the leisure time activity of the American people.
The marriage of traditional pinball machines and computer technology has resulted in the birth of a new breed of amusement games, and Nolan Bushnell is the man handing out the cigars. Bushnell has developed two such games, Computer Space and Pong, and believes that they and others like them will move the pinball industry out of America's bus stations and bowling alleys and into the space age. In 1971, Bushnell invented Computer Space, but sold production rights to Nutting Associates of Mountain View, California, for royalties based on the number of games sold. It proved a good deal for both parties. Sales already exceed 1,500 machines. Computer Space, like Pong, sells for around $1,000 and is played on the screen of a standard television set, which has been programmed to display the desired game. In Computer Space, the player controls a rocket ship, which is trying to shoot down enemy flying saucers while avoiding their missiles. If the player scores more hits than the enemy saucers, he gets one free play. By the time Bushnell invented Pong in 1972, he was able to form his own company, Syzygy Corporation in Santa Clara, California, to produce the game. He has already sold over 1,000 machines and expects to sell 10,000 in the United States by the end of the year. Pong, as the name might indicate, is a game of video ping pong. The two players turn dials which control their electronic paddles and volley with an equally electronic ball. The first player to score 15 points wins. While Bushnell did design and program both his games, the technology he uses dates back to the late 1950s. Thanks to research by the Defense Department in the wake of Sputnik, Bushnell is now able to act out his dream of a nation inhabited by thousands of Pong and Computer Space games.
The government spent millions of dollars on this technology, and as a result, now it's cheap enough that we can put it into a game and sell it for 25 cents for a few minutes and make $1 out of it. It's something that the research and development really was done many years ago, and now it's cheap enough that with PC boards and integrated circuits, we can use that technology to our advantage.
The basic electronic unit of Bushnell's games is the integrated circuit. Each of these small chips is capable of storing large amounts of information. The program for a game is determined by specific combinations of these units to form a PC, or printed circuit board. The printed circuit board then tells the TV screen what to do. A single printed circuit board is all that is required to operate Pong, whereas 15 years ago it would have taken enough tubes and wiring to fill an average house. Bushnell first saw the commercial potential of video games in a game called Space War, which has been played at computer centers around the country for several years.
We used to play Space War a lot at the AI project at Stanford, which is a big computer complex. And one day it just hit, this is a lot of fun, I'd be able to package it and sell it for a price. And, one thing leads to another, and pretty soon, from doodling on a scratch pad, you're actually working out some basic block diagrams, and from there you think, boy, it's going to work.
The AI project, where Bushnell first played Space War, is the Artificial Intelligence Project, nestled in the hills behind Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. AI is typical of computer centers where people met after hours to play the first computerized video games. Ralph Gorin is AI's head system programmer and resident Space War expert.
Well, computers started playing games because of a class of individuals, sometimes called hackers, who received access to computers at midnight and other odd times. Hackers are sort of compulsive computer programmers. If they're given access to a computer, they'll write programs. And as display devices became available with computers, these people started using them in new and different ways. And Space War was born of the emerging display technology and these compulsive programmers.
Gorin might resent people using the Space War game he helped develop for their own personal profit, but he denies any ill feeling.
I don't feel ripped off by people who use the Space War program. I'm not the sole author of Space War. My term of proprietorship of Space War is a rather short one, considering the game's lifespan. I stood on the shoulders of many people, and I don't mind the weight of others on mine. I think it's a fine thing that Space War and other computer games should be brought to wider public availability.
Until recently, however, a game such as Space War could only be the private pastime of computer fanatics, largely because the technology was too expensive for commercial use. But that has changed.
Technology is such that things that cost lots of money years ago cost much less these days. You can get mini computers these days for $2,000 to $10,000. You can spend as much as you want, of course, but you can get a machine that could play Space War, for example, for just a couple of $1,000s. So it becomes reasonable to employ these machines in new ways. I mean, if you have $1 million invested in a piece of equipment, you're not apt to put it in a penny arcade. When the price goes down to $2,000, perhaps you would.
Although the price has not dropped to that level yet, at least one individual is planning for the day when it will. Bill Pitts, who worked at AI in the late 1960s, has also entered the video amusement industry with his Galaxy game. An outgrowth of Space War as played at AI, Galaxy is a two-player game simulating a torpedo duel between rocket ships in outer space. Galaxy is by far the most sophisticated video game on the market. It allows a choice of 4 different games. In one, the player actually pre-selects torpedo velocity, rocket speed, gravity force, and other variables. Integrated circuits and printed circuit boards do not permit this level of sophistication, so Galaxy designer Pitts has had to utilize a more complex computer system.
The hardware that Bushnell uses in the Pong game is a printed circuit board which he designed specifically to do the job of playing Pong, whereas we're using a general purpose mini computer, and the game that we are playing now, Galaxy game, is determined only by the programming. And if we wanted to change this to be some other game, we could change the programming in a matter of 10 minutes in the field for each machine, and we would have a different game.
The ultimate in video games would be one with the flexibility of Pitt's game and the low cost of Bushnell's, but the two elements have not yet come together. The mini-computer used in the first Galaxy game cost $12,000 alone, so Pitts has been able to build only 3 games. It will be another 3 to 5 years before the price of his hardware will be low enough to permit large-scale production of Galaxy or games like it. So for the immediate future, the advantage seems to lie with the less expensive game, Pong and Computer Space, and Nolan Bushnell. At Syzygy's factory in Santa Clara, Bushnell employs 130 workers who have been turning out 300 Pong games a week. Like the product itself, the workers are young, with an average age of 23. Most of the factory is devoted to the assembling and testing of the game, but one area serves as a research department where 40 new games are being planned. 6 are already firmly committed to production. Not only are new products being mapped out, but new markets as well. More aesthetically pleasing and relatively less noisy than standard pinball machines, Pong and Computer Space have already moved beyond the walls of the traditional arcade.
We have machines now in Sears, we have them in pizza parlors, we have them in shopping malls, clothing stores, department stores, almost anywhere that people have time on their hands. A shopping mall is a great place to go and kill time. Many times you don't want to even shop. And so people are walking up and down looking for something to do. They get tired of looking at the 4 walls of their apartment, and they want to get out and take a look at things. And if our machines are there, it's fun for them, and that's what they want to do.
The technology that allowed Bushnell to create these video games and make them widely available has now allowed the amusement industry to take another step. Ironically, it is a step back inside the 4 walls of apartments and homes. Video games, after all, are no more than programmed television sets, and now for $100, any set can be programmed with the Odyssey game produced by Magnavox. With much simpler technology than Pong or Computer Space, Odyssey allows you to play a version of Pong. So for the first time, people can personally program on a limited scale what appears on their television screen. But as more complex technology becomes cheaper, people will be able to program their television sets in more sophisticated ways.
The home terminal will be commonplace in most people's, homes, like the telephone, and you'll have access to computerized databases to do your shopping, to find out what's going on, current events, news digests, replaces trips to the library, and really countless uses.
Games have thus become the unlikely escort, bringing computer technology into the home and signaling an age of mass employment of computers in everyday life.
So just a quick note, that was a documentary that was found in Ralph Baer's storage locker, and many years ago, seriously, it was actually used in the original court trials back in the 70s, the patent trials, and David Winter, PongStory.com, actually happened to get a hold of the copy and then transfer it to digital, which is why we have it right now. So with just moving right along, from the very beginnings of Atari in 1973 to the gentleman that helped make the Atari name what it was, what we're going to do is start with introductions. Many of these gentlemen don't need any, but we're going to do them anyway. So, what's that? Yeah, let me get the lights. We'll start right here in the end.
Oh.
Introduce yourself.
David Crane. I started at Atari in 1977 doing games for the 2600.
Rob Zadibel, I started in '79 and was delighted to do games for 2600, and they also gave us a free 800, man.
Do that.
Okay,
So I'm Keithan, and I'm sort of the odd man out because I did the 5200 because I wanted better graphics, and the better graphics that I saw that I wanted were all due to Rob Zadibel. He did the rainbow Atari logo up front, and that's what sold me on programming for Pam.
Hi, my name's Steve Woida, and I went from Apple to Atari to work on the worst graphics on 2600.
Hello, I'm Howard Scott Warshaw. I got to Atari in '81. I did Yar's Revenge, E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Saboteur. And I would like to say that it's great to be back at CGE because I missed some CGEs. A funny thing happened was that I became a psychotherapist over the last decade. And so at one point during a CGE, I was all set to come and be here, but I actually had a psychopharmacology class that I had to attend to be there, so it was actually an ironic thing in video game history. I think it's the only time drugs actually kept someone away from a video game event.
Bob Polaro. I was at Atari from 78 to 84, started on the 800, then the 2600.
I'm Bob Smith. I came to Atari in 1980 and left in 1981 to do a Magic. The only Atari card I did was Video Pinball, actually.
I'm Aaron Hightower. I came to Atari Games coin-op in 1997 and left in 2001. I may be the the youngest guy on this panel here.
Don Traeger. I was at Atari in the coin-op group in like 79 through 83, somewhere in there. And I guess my biggest achievement at Atari is I'm the voice of Paperboy.
Thanks, Don. I'm Steven Riesenberger. I, like Aaron, was at Atari in the coin-op division in the early to late 90s. I started in 94. I worked on Primal Rage 2, and the San Francisco Rush driving series through Rush 2049.
Well, I know a lot of people probably going to want to ask this question of you guys, so let's put it on the floor here. What was your favorite time at Atari? What did you like the best, and what did you like the least? So why don't you guys tell it in your own words why you loved Atari, or why you hated Atari, or why you loved and hated Atari? So we're gonna start with Bob Smith because he's right next to me right now. So we'll make it easy, and we'll just kind of maybe work our way around randomly. You guys put up your hands as you want to go.
Well, let's start with the worst. I mean, the worst was the fact that we were owned by Warner. So that meant a lot of corporate types running around, a marketing department, and all the things that are bad with large companies in a creative group. The best part was working with the smartest, most creative people, and a bunch of us. So it was, it was like kindred spirits. I don't know that I'd call us hackers, but we're certainly the creative type.
Keep it up.
Keep it in front. Let's switch it around front.
Okay, that makes sense.
As much as
Well, I guess the worst thing is when marketing complained about us not having a round ball in our first games. And I guess the best would be the peers that I worked with. It was the most fun I've ever had in a working environment.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think the best part of it was really the environment that we were doing it in. For me personally, it was the marriage of technology and creativity. The idea that, writing a computer program is writing a computer program. It's a straightforward thing, and you know if it's right because it works. But when you make a game, you have to get all of the technology right, and then it has to not suck. It has to be playable, and that's a very different thing to do than just make your computer program run. And meeting those challenges, that was, for me, I think, one of the most exciting things. And one of the worst things was, it was that transition, I think, when the focus of what we were doing left making a fun game and picked up meeting a schedule. And that became the real focus.
I'll go with the fun part stuff. The fun part was just being able to create anything you wanted to, and I was able to do that because they didn't know where I was at most of the time. I was in the back next to all the sheetrock, and I'm not even sure they knew I was on the payroll half the time, but it was fun to just create anything I wanted, and I didn't feel like I was under any pressure, but I'm sure some manager was taking pressure for me, but and then going down the hallways and just talking to everybody, knock on a door, and then you see, Howard or whoever, and talk to them for a while was completely entertaining, to say the least. And I really do miss that kind of stuff, just being able to go down the hallways and see these characters and talk to them. And it was a very creative place, and I learned a lot there.
So I was going to say I started out at Berkeley doing chip design, and I actually went on a co-op program down at Hughes Aircraft where I actually had a job and made enough money to buy one of the first Apple IIs. And when we had a graduation party at my house when we were graduating, I had my Apple II set up, and we had a line of people that were engineers waiting to play, one person at a time on the Apple II. And I was sitting there thinking, there's got to be a better way. I wanted more people to be able to play. And so by the time I got to Atari, it's like there were things I wanted to play, and at Atari I got to build the things I wanted to play. That was what I thought was the coolest.
Well, that's what you did at Atari. They set you down. You came in. Dave was a lot of help. He helped you out a lot. He said, "Here's the lab. Here's your dev system. Here's the manual. Plump. Have a good time." It was great. Anyone who wanted to do the work, they were all geniuses anyway, and they'd pick up that crap, and that's all they needed. And 2 weeks later, 6 weeks later, you'd come around their office, and you'd come to work one day, and Dave would be, "Well, what are you doing?" "I got a screen up." "Okay, cool. You're fine. I don't need to worry about you anymore." Atari really, of all the people here, I'm the person who's at Atari the longest. I joined in April 1979, and I was with them until the Trammels declared bankruptcy in 1995. So, I saw the whole thing, and there were several eras, and really the best era was the early era, 79, 80s. We had complete creative control. These guys whine about marketing, but we mocked them. They would put up on the bulletin board their little list of games they wanted, and we would just make fun. Rock Fight was always number one, yeah. What the hell is Rock Fight? Yeah, and that was it. That was marketing at the time. They were still small and funny. In fact, I got more stories, but they're all in Howard's movies, so you just watch that instead. And then, as people departed, the business broke open with Activision spilling the secret of how much money there was to be made. Things became crazier at Atari, more regimented. We got a lot more execs sticking their fingers in the pie. Like some have said, the schedules got more important. And the other thing that changed was no one was interested in your original titles anymore. When you first came, it was like, do whatever the hell you want, right? As long as you're doing something, we don't give a damn. And then it was like, oh, can we have, the rip-off of this coin-op game or that coin-op game? We need this title. We want this. We don't care if you put a game behind this. Kim Kardashian's name is on it, okay? It's going to sell like hotcakes. And that was kind of the antithesis of what we'd always been about. And then, of course, the company finally was sold to Trammels, and actually, the Trammels were actually really good people to work for. It was quite enjoyable in many ways, and I'm happy to tell stories about that too, but I think I better pass it on to the guys, the big star here.
Well, we have Dave Green to thank for that. For screwing the whole thing up in the first place by leaving.
Thank you. Best and worst. As Bob Smith said, Warner Communications had made the deal with Nolan. And in 1977, the deal was certainly there, but Nolan was still around. And Nolan, you saw him in that movie. He basically saw a way to make a dime and went after it, right? But once he had one success, like the Pong, to Nolan it was, he basically wanted to do stuff that he thought was neat. And it was his word. Neat was his word. So if you were talking to Nolan and you said, I've got this idea, if he, it's kind of like what Johnny Carson calls the comedian over and has him sit down, that makes his career. But with Nolan, if he looks at you and says, that's neat, or that sounds neat, and you were there, you were funded, in essence. But it didn't take long before Warner's influence was felt. The company was corporatized a lot more. We were still separated enough that nobody really knew what we were doing, so as long as we kept turning out hit products and making $100 million a year for Atari, everything was wonderful. But, you know, it all just kept slowly getting worse and worse. So I was there in '77, made a handful of games, and by the end of '79 was gone. And since this is the Atari panel and not the Activision panel, I will tell the story that has been overtold many times, but there were 4 of us that started Activision. We were kind of a group. We'd eat lunch together and work together and help each other, so it was a little clique of 4. And Atari circulated a memo from marketing that said, here are the games that sold well last year. So it was a list of all the games prioritized by number of sales and percentage of sales. And we looked at that, and basically the 4 of us had been working kind of the longest and working the best together, and looked at that, and we tallied up what we had made in that list, and it was 60% of their sales. And it was an open secret that they had done $100 million in cartridge sales the previous year. So what marketing was saying is, here is your percentage of $100 million that this game contributed to. And what the memo said is, do more up here and less like the ones down here.
Brilliant.
Yeah. But it turned out to be the last straw, because we went to the management and said, you know, come on. I mean, there's something to being an author in this business. And if we're making you $60 million a year, you know, we're kind of limping along on $25,000 a year salaries. We're not seeing any bonuses. We're not seeing any royalties or whatever. And we said, can you like chip in a little bit? And they basically said no. And a week later, we were off founding Activision. And what, 6 months later? I don't know. How long after was the Magic? When did the Magic start?
Mid-'81.
Mid-'81. The vice president of marketing of Atari walked back into the lab and said, you, and you, come with me. Basically, he took the next group to form a Magic. And yes, Activision was very successful. I mean, we were working in a monopoly. There was nobody else but Atari and us doing Atari games. So there's kind of a marketing advantage there when you've got a monopoly. Atari had it and lost it, but between the 2 of us, we shared it. And the downfall of the video game business that came after that was largely due to the success of Activision and Magic, where in one 6-month period, when we had trade shows, we'd go to CES, and in one 6-month period, we went from there being 2 game companies making games for the Atari 2600 to, I think it was 30 new companies, or 28 new companies. So there was 30 in the book making making games, and they didn't have experienced video game people. They got some venture capital money. They hired some programmers off the street and say, you know how to program. Here, write a game. You know. And that's when the market was flooded with all of these very poor quality games, and America lost its dominance in video games. So in a nutshell, that was the Atari and the few years afterward. But again, working with Nolan was probably the highlight. It was a lot of fun working with him. But again, the corporatization of Atari was the real bummer.
So best and worst for Atari. I think I said earlier I joined Atari after Atari was gone, apparently, but there was more than one Atari. I joined what was known as Atari Games, and they were owned by Time Warner before I was there. When I joined, they had been purchased by Midway Games in Chicago. And I came from an environment, I was working on a Nintendo 64 game as a second-party developer to Nintendo called Pilot Wing 64. I got a call from a recruiter, said, hey, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to work on an arcade racing game. And I was thinking Daytona and that type of thing. And they said, well, you know, I got this position at Atari. And I was like, Atari, aren't they out of business? And they said, just hold on. Just let me have somebody call you. You're saying all the right things. Let me have somebody call you, and we'll see what happens. So I got a call from John Ray. Now, John Ray worked on Fire Truck. I talked to John Ray, and I had just gone to one of the gaming conferences, and I had seen a couple of these games. I'd played San Francisco Rush, which Ed Logg, who co-developed Asteroids along with Lyle Raines, had created this Nintendo 64 port of San Francisco Rush. And I played it, and when I played it at the show, I was like, it feels like hard driving. So when I talked to John Ray, I was like, it kind of felt like the hard driving model. And he's like, yeah, we're still using the same code from hard driving in this game. And the guy that made Asteroids Coin-Op is the guy who ported the Coin-Op version to the Nintendo 64. And I was like, wow, now that's really cool. And I talked to the programmer, and we talked about Asteroids and all of this old Coin-Op stuff. And I mean, I played all the Coin-Op games when I was a kid. So for me, the most exciting thing about Atari was, Nintendo was great, okay, but they're like, you're going to do it like this. We got this fax from Miyamoto, and here's how the game design works, and this is exactly how you do it, and you're a good programmer, do it. And we're like, okay, this is a great opportunity. But at Atari, we were asked to use our creativity and come up with new game design ideas and to do things that help the company to make more money. So we were more involved in the process. And in a nutshell, being able to work with greats like Mike Halley and Ed Logg, and Dave Shepard, who created Asteroids Deluxe, was still there. He was our operating systems guy. Charlie Grisafi, who created Area 51 Maximum Force. And all these guys that had this just absolutely brilliant history in video game creation. We also had Steve Ritchie across the hall making California Speed, who's like one of the greatest pinball designers of all time. And to be able to work amongst these guys and be creative, that was absolutely the best part about Atari. And it was a surprise for me because that's what I really wanted. I was a big player, and I wanted to create, what I felt were really fun, fantastically fun games with people that knew what they were doing, and to be able to do that was the best thing. And I'm just going to skip the worst part because it was just fantastic.
Yeah, so for me in late 70s and early 80s, I was in the Coin-Op group, and we had a blast. I guess the home group and the Coin-Op group were pretty insulated from each other, and we kind of looked at the constant turmoil in the home business and kind of scared us. But on the Coin-Op side, we had a lot. I thought we had a lot of creative freedom to still kind of create and originate stuff, and we weren't so under the mandate of of what seemed like the kind of harshness of the home business at the time. And the graphics and everything that we were doing were really kind of the high end of anything going on at that time, so we were pretty excited about it. I worked with Ed Logg. He finished, he didn't start Centipede, but he finished it, and then he did Millipede. And Mike Halley. So about this must have been about, and this, Bob, this is a little different take on the Time Warner. So must have been 81 or 82. We were going to a big Coin-Op show in New Orleans, and Mike Halley was going to debut Firefox. It was one of the early Laserdisc games. And like 2 days before the show, it wasn't even running. So Time Warner lent us one of Clint Eastwood's jets. They converted it into a lab, and we flew out there on the Time Warner jet, and Hal actually got it working on the plane flight to New Orleans. So Time Warner occasionally had some benefits. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, so that was kind of a glimpse of the Coin-Op at that time.
So I originally thought to talk about the worst part of working at Atari was the end, because I was there from '94 till about 2002 when they closed the production facility. All of the arcade cabinets stopped being made across the street in the warehouse, and our team was asked to work on console games instead of the arcade game that we were scheduled to work on. So, but I like Aaron mentioned, the best part of working there for me was it was a childhood dream realized. And I grew up playing the Atari 2600, and I grew up playing the arcade games. And here were some of the guys that made those games were still walking around in the halls, Halley and Ed Logg, and all of the artwork from the cabinets was still there, and some of the schematics from 720 were still in Mike Halley's archives. And this was just, I'm going crazy. This is the people that I work with. But I will say one thing about I experienced more of a collaboration between the console group and the coin-op group when I was there, at least where Ed Log was concerned. In the San Francisco Rush console versions, Nintendo 64 and the Dreamcast, we had a lot of collaborative ideas. The artists and the programmers would come and play the arcade game because it had force feedback steering and it ran at higher frame rates. And I remember one of the biggest breakthrough moments for me was when we took some of the console tracks that they had been making for Rush 2, and I said, well, what format are they in? We'll just throw them in, and I'll try to get it running on the arcade machine. And the artist that made the track came over and drove his track on the arcade machine for the first time, and he almost wet himself for joy, because that is how you're supposed to experience San Francisco Rush. And that started a whole back and forth of sharing of content, sharing cars, sharing tracks between the home console and Rush the Rock and Rush 2049. And I think it was a great relationship to have, geniuses to share ideas and say, hey, let's make each other's games better. So it definitely was more collaborative, at least in my experience.
Just a quick minor correction. You guys keep calling it Time Warner. Time Warner didn't exist until the 90s. It was just Warner Communications when you guys were there. Now you guys have told some good stories about your good times, your bad times. What I'd really like to see if you want to talk about is what game or games did you really like to work on? Which one didn't you maybe want to work on? It could be. It could be. Maybe we've got some future work for you, Rob. You never know.
Yeah, it's the same interview question I always ask.
I'm talking to Leonard Tremail. I might be able to get you rehired. So, tell us, what game was like your favorite to work on or worst to work on, or what game did you maybe really want to work on that you didn't get a chance to?
Okay, well, I don't know. I suppose just because of the context here, I'll talk about Canyon Bomber and Depth Charge, which is the 2600 cartridge that I did. There was a separation between the coin-op and home divisions. I'm not sure how intentional it was. It was a physical difference. We were in different locations.
Upstairs and downstairs.
Yeah, all right.
Just because you didn't mingle with it, not all of us had that same experience. I want to say right now, because two of you guys have said this, that coin-op and 2600 was like this. We played their games, they played their game. They came up and played Star Raiders when Neubauer was building it. Do I have to separate you two guys? No. Someone else said the same thing. They thought there was, but I didn't experience that. We were very close to coin-op. I hung out with those guys all the time.
Well, certainly we were playing the arcade games in the hallways all the time when we didn't want to be working. There was at least that.
Oh, we'd go into the lab and play games there.
Now, I don't know how they felt about you, Dick.
Yeah, well, I guess that's what it is. But no, what it was interesting is we were always a little envious of the arcade group because of the power of the machines they could use. We were stuck with the 2600 that was in Grandma's house. All right, you couldn't change it. All right, it was already sold into the market. There were 6.5 million of them out there, and every game we had to make, or every game we made, had to work with that hardware. And, we would kind of under our breath say, those arcade guys, they just need another CPU, they throw it in there. 128K of RAM, throw it in there. Put in some ROM, whatever. So one of my proudest moments was doing two of Atari's arcade games, Canyon Bomber and Depth Charge, both in a 2K byte 2600 cartridge. And they were both $3,000 arcade machines with, 10 times the power of the 2600. So they were simplified versions, I'll admit, but that was kind of fun. So otherwise, we had a lot of creative freedom. The reason Atari made the Atari 2600 was to sell home versions of their arcade games. Simple as that. So the hardware designers of the 2600 made it capable of playing Tank and Pong. And if you look at the hardware, talk to Joe DeCure, the hardware is all designed to do those two games. And if you can do any other games, that's great. And what were there, 6,000 games made for the 2600? It was unbelievable number. I don't know how many it was.
Like 800.
You think it was only 800, huh?
I was actually shocked, but I heard a count of it. It was like 770 something.
Okay.
Under 800 at games.
Still an amazingly large
And
number.
that
I never would've
includes
guessed.
like Beat 'em and Eat 'em and all the X-rated games. And
Yeah.
stuff like that.
So,
you guys are discounting a lot of the homebrews, though. There's still a lot.
That's true. That may not be.
well, there's a lot going on, so the number is still climbing. But anyway, so as long as we, in our group, had one or two of the arcade games going in projects, then we could experiment with the hardware and try to do something special with it. I mean, if you look at Air Sea Battle, which came out with was shipped with the Sears version, I think, at least, if not with the Atari version. Already, the guys had figured out how to reposition the sprites and use them for multiple bands and all that kind of stuff, all the tricks that we ended up using to make some 800, 2600 games. So with that kind of freedom, you could pretty much work on anything you want. Now, unfortunately, in 1978, Atari decided it didn't want to be a video game company. It wanted to be a home computer manufacturer, and came out with the Atari 400-800. And that was one of the downfalls of any business, in that the senior management thought we were making a computer, and the engineering management thought we were making the coolest, newest video game console.
Which we were.
Which we were. I mean, we were making this hardware so that it could do all these cool video games, but everybody up top was thinking that we were back there busting our butt to make, a home computer better than the Apple II. So in the heyday of my design career at Atari, those of us who ended up founding Activision were brought aside and said, we got this home computer, we need to write an operating system for this home computer. And they took their game designers and said, here, write an operating system for a computer. And that's what we did for the last, 10, 12 months of my time at Atari. I would have rather been making games.
Okay, wow. Didn't Larry Kaplan do most of that work on the OS? Isn't he really the father of the architecture there?
No, actually, Larry and Al and I were doing the operating system. I was doing the graphics parts, and Larry and Al were doing some of the meat. And we brought in a consultant who handled the disk drive stuff and created the I/O control blocks and all those things that were in there. Bob was the only one who got to keep making games of the four of us who started Activision. But it was not a very good use of resources, I don't think.
I thought it was. I liked my 800 having an operating system. I thought that was damn useful.
You know about the Al Miller bit in the operating system? One of the things that you always think of with a video game system is you have complete control of the hardware. Absolutely complete control of the hardware. Now, you start introducing an operating system, you don't have that anymore. Like, you're doing work on a Windows machine, you've got the operating system doing that. Doing a game in the browser, you have the browser sitting on top of an operating system, and your game is, behind all that stuff. So basically, if the first byte of an Atari 800 game cartridge had the MSB set, the operating system looked at that as the first thing it did, and if it saw that, it quit and just ran the game. It did not initialize, it didn't take over anything, it didn't set up any interrupts, it just quit. And that was Al Miller saying, if I'm writing a game for this thing, I don't want any operating system in there. So shut the darn thing off.
It actually jumped to an address that was at the end of the ROM, so it would do.
Yep.
And jump through that address. Okay, let's see. Well, I programmed just basically about every console unit that Atari ever shipped, and a couple they didn't ship. I probably told the Colleen story. If anyone, there was a console that was built that actually was an absolutely couldn't work. It's a fascinating engineering story. If you want to hear about the difference between NMIs and IRQs and 6502 coding, I'll be glad to tell you. I programmed that little pig. I programmed everything. I can't think of anything we didn't do. I programmed the ST. My favorite programming project, though, was Warbirds for the Atari Lynx. I really enjoyed doing that. And the reason I made that game is an interesting story. I hung out with a group of guys. If you have the game, you know it's dedicated to my dad, who was a pilot in Korea. And my buddies, the Friday nights, we get together every Friday and play games, hence the clever name. And we would always play, played a huge variety of games. This is before Eurotrash came out, so we played a lot of Ameritrash and a lot of Avalon Hill stuff even, you know. And we played these flight games. And you play a flight game with people, and they take 45 minutes to take their damn turn. It's supposed to simulate 10 seconds of flight, man, you know. And everyone's calculating and recalculating and counting hexes and looking up tables. And I said, Jesus, it'd be nice if we had a flight game where we could just sit at the table and play, and that you would, you know. And we were releasing the links, but the problem was I couldn't think of a good way to do it. And if any of you guys remember Battlehawks 1942, which was a brilliant piece of work, the lights went on for me one day when I saw Battlehawks 1942. I said, I know how to put this game on the Lynx. I can do it with sprites, and the Lynx was a beautiful sprite machine. Dave Needle was a genius, and is a genius. He's still alive, unless he went back to Jupiter. So it was just such a wonderful programming project. And on top of that, Leonard Trammell's name came up, so I got to tell a Leonard Trammell story. So I told Leonard, I want to do this airplane game. I think it's going to be good. And we had a marketing guy whose name I will not mention, who was in Chicago at the time, and he'd come out, and he wanted me to do Ninja Gaiden. So we're sitting in my office, Leonard and the marketing guy and me, and the marketing guy keeps going, you got to do Ninja Gaiden. You got to do Ninja Gaiden. It's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer, you know. You can do that, and then you can do whatever stupid game you want to do, because we got the title for Ninja Gaiden. And I'm thinking, Ninja Gaiden reduced to a screen this large, you know. It's not going to be all that much fun. That's not a game I want to do. And bless Leonard Trammell, halfway through this little harangue, Leonard steps in and says, well, why don't you do it then? And the marketing guy thinks he's talking to me and says, see, your boss agrees with me. And Leonard says, no, asshole, I'm talking to you. If it's such a effing no-brainer, why don't you go ahead and do it yourself and keep my programmers out of it? So that was nice.
So I had a completely different little thing. We've talked about everyone wanted to do original things, and management was like into trying to get people to do their list of things. And I was one of the people that always said, okay, I'll do what they assign me to. So there was a game that we were trying to do that was this war game. There was going to be a movie out, that I forget if it was Firefox or Foxfire. It was the opposite of what the Clint Eastwood was being done by Dark Horse Productions, and it was kind of a war games meets West Side Story. Weird little thing, but I think everyone in the building had been assigned it. I'd seen like the memo that had all kinds of names on it, and I was the one that finally said, sure, I'll do it. And so I got together with the producers and pitched something that we would do, and I was going to start working on it. But War Games came out, and basically the thing got canceled. But for a while, they were writing up. When you're in movies, when you don't write a full script, when you want to get someone to fund it, they do what are called treatments. And so I had my treatment in which they're talking about in the movie that they're going to be playing this game at, and then we would sell the game in conjunction with it. But they were going to say, and who did you have design this? And it was right in the plot line that, oh yeah, we got some of the best in the business, Keithan and stuff like that. So I was almost in the movie, but it didn't get there, and it died. So there were things that died. So that was one of the things I didn't like about stuff. But
so I came from Apple Computer in 1980 is when I started at Apple and worked there. It was a very formal company at the time, but very small. Nobody really knew about us. And I was always playing 2600 games at home. And so fast forward a few years, I was working in the R&D department, working on the custom chips for the Apple IIe, and they were called Adam and Eve chips. Along the way, I was learning how to move graphics and stuff around by Bill Budge, this guy here, Keithan, and Andy Hertzfeld. And Keithan tells me that he's going to go and interview at Atari, and I was like, oh, wow, I've always wanted to do a game. And he and I were working on some bitmap graphic stuff, trying to make a game kind of similar to Tempest, and so he gets an interview over there and he gets hired. to work on the 5200, and I was like, oh wow, and he goes, I think I can get you an interview over here. So I take lunch off from Apple, drive down. First thing I hear when I open the door is this loud whip sound, and I'm like, what is that? And I hear it again like 3 times, and I'm looking, and I don't even know where the receptionist is now because I'm trying to focus on this sound, and something's going down. And I see Howard coming out from the hallway around the corner with his Raiders hat on and a real bullwhip. And so, in contrast, the Apple that come in the door, there's a bullwhip going and everything. And then I think I interviewed with you for a few minutes while you were in the hallway while you were still doing your scene. And so the next thing I know, I got hired, and I don't even know if there was more of a formal process than that. So, and I was also hired to work on the 5200. So I said, no, I don't want to work on the 5200. And my manager at the time was Don Tizer. He's the one that hired me. He wanted me to work on the 5200 because I had bitmap experience and all this stuff, 6502 experience. And I said, I want to work on the 2600. That machine's out there. I played it when I was a kid, which was like a year or 2 before that, and had a great time with it. And he goes, fine. And he disappears and comes back. And I was just telling you this story last night. Takes the manuals for the 2600 and just throws them at my feet and says, "Have fun figuring it out." And then that was it. And then I ended up moving into the back where they didn't even know where I was at. So I got to work on all kinds of crazy stuff trying to figure out how this machine worked. So I just kind of put together a learning game, and it turned out to be that Quadron game. And I just put a bunch of weird junk in there trying to figure out timing and stuff, and put my voice in there, and then kind of put it on hold. And then ended up working on a game called Taz with a Tasmanian Devil. And then I think I went back and finished off Quadron. And they play tested, and it tested horribly because they had 10 to 12-year-old girls that were just saying, this is not like Miss Pac-Man. And so in those days we had focus groups, the old school stuff with the glass, one-way thing, and for 2 hours, that's all I was hearing is how this game is not like Miss Pac-Man. It's a goofy space game, and I was just trying to learn how to do the timing of the kernels and stuff. And there was just no way they were going to like it. So it got shelved, and I think marketing said, no, not really shelved. They said, well, let's put it through the Atari Club. And so they made like 10,000 of them. And so that was one of my favorite projects to work on because it was just, so against the grain of what was going on there. And they always wanted to focus test everything. And I was the guy that always didn't want to do, all the movie titles and the coin-op conversions that were assigned to us. I always wanted to do an original one. And so that was my only really original one as far as without a character, because I decided I wanted to put Taz on the 2600 version of that game because I had a fork going back and forth. I was like, hey, we're a Warner company and Taz is my favorite character, so I'll stick that on there. And for that reason, to this day, is why we can't get that game on any of these emulators and stuff that are going around because of the license problem with it, so that was kind of bizarre. But anyway, so Quadron was one of my favorite ones because it was a learning game, and I got the voice to happen in there. And and the Taz story was it was normally Tasmanian Devil, and I just wanted to shorten the name, so I had it T-A-Z-Z. And Warner flew down to look at what I did, and somebody from Warner, not somebody, and said, we like the game, but just, can you pull one of the Z's off? And I said, yeah, okay, let's do that. So that took another 200 hours of test, because that was the only change. Everything was great, and yeah, I guess with a slight help from the guy from Warner. Yeah, by pulling a Z. Yeah, but I'm sure he got the credit for it. But anyway. No, it's like that's hard to say.
It's like a jazz stuff never did.
A good point. But anyway.
Now, speaking of creating game titles, I think great lead-in. Thank you.
I was thinking of you when I was talking.
Really? Do you do that a lot?
Every sentence.
Very nice. So, best and worst, interesting. I hear people talking about like marketing, what a pain in the ass they were, and they were, and what a tough machine it was, and it was brutal. But I've never really been a super complainer kind of guy. I'm always like, just bring it on. And so, like, when I first got hired at Atari, which was its own thing, because when I first got to Atari, and I interviewed and everything was cool, and then Dennis Coble calls me up and says, we're afraid you're a little too straight for our environment, which turned out to be pretty funny in retrospect. But I literally begged my way in to get an opportunity to start there, and they gave me like a probationary chance to get in there. Oh, Rob helped.
Can I say in our defense, we did not know at the time when Dennis told him that he was a romper room graduate.
That's true. And that romper room diploma served us well in many special meetings that we had. But, yeah, and when I first went in and Dennis said, what do you want to work on? What machine do you want to work on? Because they had 5200, they were starting to work up on the 400, 800, there's a lot of different things to do. And I just said, give me what's the grittiest, worst machine, what's the toughest machine you have to program? Because that's why I left Hewlett-Packard, which is where I came to Atari from. And I didn't like big formal programming environments. I liked gritty down to the hardware kind of stuff. And he said, oh, well, you'll want to work on the 2600. And then they gave me a game, and I said, oh, Stargate. That's, Star Castle. Stargate was a whole nother one. And I said, that's a nice game, but I don't think it's going to work on your machine. And I've been there like 3 or 4 days, but I mean, I've read the manual, and I said, this game I think would really suck, but I said, I think we could do something else. And to his credit, he let me do it. He let me go ahead and do something else, and that became a game that was, the working title was Time Freeze for a while. That was my concept for it, but this was the game that became Yar's Revenge. And there were some fun moments with the whips, as I recall, with Raiders, and I did E.T., which, I want to talk about one of the worst experiences you have with a game. But I'm not going to talk about E.T. now, because we'll talk plenty about that at 5 o'clock. But I didn't have any bad games. I mean, I really was into what I was doing on each game. E.T. was the toughest, certainly. But Yars was the most special to me, and it always has been. And although I have to say one thing is that walking around with the whip at Raiders, every once in a while there'd be TV crews in. And there was a great moment once where they were in the lab, and I happened to walk in with the bullwhip, and there's like this TV crew with a camera, and they're like, oh, well, let's shoot this. And so they looked at me and they said, what's the whip for? And I don't know why, but I just said, this is for R&D, right? This is research and discipline. And so that made the 11 o'clock news. That was good. But I think the story that I'd like to tell that's one of the most fun moments for me was, like we said, we complained about marketing, and marketing was really a difficult thing to deal with, but to me it wasn't like, if you can't beat them, join them. And the thing was, in naming Yars, I wanted to out-market marketing. I wanted to use some marketing techniques on marketing to get this through, because I was worried about what they would do, because I didn't want this game that I was really happy with to become the next Rock Fight. And so I thought, well, I'm going to have to make up a name for this. And so I talked to the product manager, and I said, hey, is there a name for this game yet? Is it all set yet? He goes, no. He goes, it's still open. I said, can I make a submission? Would it be okay if I submitted something? He goes, oh, sure. I said, okay. So that night, that afternoon, I started thinking, and this went into the evening and into the night, and I thought, okay, I need a name, and I need a name, and I need a plan. And so I thought up, Yar is kind of nice because it's Ray spelled backwards. And I'll set this thing in like the Razak solar system, which is Kazar spelled backwards. So Ray Kazar was the CEO at Atari at the time. And I thought, okay, so if I can tie his name in, that'll be good. But then but maybe that's not enough. And so I decided to write a story that was the Yarian revenge of Razak 4. So I had a whole backstory that I wrote. I wrote this like 7-8 page story that night. I was there all night, which was not that unusual, I guess, at Atari, but writing a story was unusual. And so I spent that night getting this whole thing set up. In the morning, here comes the product manager. And so I said, okay, I've got this submission for you. And I said, and it's got a story too. And I want you, here's the whole package, and here you go. And he goes, okay, and he put it in. And then I went home and went to sleep, when most people were coming in to go to work, because that wasn't unusual either. And the next day I said to him, I said, hey, how's it going? Is everything in process? He goes, yeah, they're still thinking it over. I said, oh, okay. And I said, look, I want to tell you a little secret. I said, but I have to make sure you're not going to tell anybody. And he goes, oh, no, I won't tell anybody. And so I made him swear 3 times that he would not tell anybody until I was absolutely sure he would tell everyone. And I said, you know the name Yar? I said, what's that backwards? And he's like, yeah, Ray. And I said, and that Razak thing, you know what that is? And he goes, yeah. Oh, that's Kazar, Ray Kazar? I go, yeah. He goes, does Ray know about this? He goes, of course. I said, of course, of course Ray knows about it. That's why I don't want you to tell anybody, because that would unfairly influence the game. And I don't want it to be fair. And so, and then he said, okay, I said, don't tell anybody. He goes, oh, I won't. And then he took off. And I knew 2 things at that point. I knew, A, that he was going to run right back and tell the committee, oh my God, Ray's involved in the name of this. We got to pick this one. And B, I knew that no one had the balls to go and talk to Ray about it, so Ray would never hear about it. And sure enough, the next day I see, he goes, guess what, Howard? He goes, we're going to go with Yar's Revenge. I said, oh, that's great. That's great. I really felt good that I had pulled one on marketing, and then it turned out that what I had done was invented the backstory for a game, because this became a comic book that went along with the game, and there were a lot of firsts that Yar's Revenge had. But this one, I think, was one of my favorite, was, launching the idea of a backstory and an environment that a game takes place in. But then it was a few months later, we were doing one of the demo things, it was coming up to the Christmas thing, so there was a lot of press and a lot of news going on, and we had to go to the monkey shows where we'd have to play the games for people at the pressers and stuff. And I was playing a game, and Ray Kazar comes up to me. And he goes, hey, Howard, he goes, I heard about that thing you did with the name, with the game. And I said, well, how'd you like that, Ray? He goes, just keep making games, Howard. Just keep making games. So I see, that was a pretty good moment for me at Atari.
Great, I got to follow Howard. Anyway, I'm thinking about the, not a project I didn't want to work on, but I was disappointed that I had to work on it, which was, my first project was Stunt Cycle. It was a 2K game when a motorcycle jumping over, I don't know what it was, blocks. And I finished it, and they decided not to release it, and I don't know why. And then a couple of months later, there was this new hit TV show from the 70s. You've heard of Dukes of Hazzard. Anyway, they said, yeah, we want you to convert this game to Dukes of Hazzard, where your orange car jumping over a lake. I said, well, the game works fine. Okay, just do this dumb game. So, so I went. They changed the graphics around. I jumped over the lake, but it still played the same music that I had before. I mean, it sounded like a motorcycle when it jumped over, but then it played that a Dixie song. So I guess that's I didn't sell out when I was doing that, but I just felt it was a crazy decision. The game that I really wanted to work on and really get released was Bugs Bunny, which I felt was kind of a breakthrough game in that it was very easy to play for kids, and the graphics were cute, and we did some nice little title screen. Alan Murphy is one of the graphics for that. And it was a lot of fun to play. You grabbed the bullets from the house and everything. But then they play tested it against Snoopy and the Red Baron with 15-year-old boys. And guess which game they chose. So Bugs Bunny got shelved. And it did get released, partial release a few years ago through Atari 2600. They were able to take the prototype version and go through some hoops to get it out, get it released. So at least it got out there. Right. So that's the story with that.
Mandy, I can tell you why you ended up doing Dukes of Hazzard if you didn't know. Warner came in and they had a big cross-pollination meeting, and well, we got all these new titles that we bought, and we'd like to see you guys develop it. Before then, it'd be like, do whatever you want, And we named it whatever we pleased to Howard, by the way. And they got sold, pretty much. But that's another story. And so we're sitting at the table, me, Steve Wright, and several of us at this big brainstorming session. And I said, oh, I've got this great idea. It's all my fault, Steve. I said, we got this game, Stunt Cycle. It tests for shit, man.
Wow!
You know what Stunt Cycle? It wasn't a badly done game. It was just
Thanks for
Stunt
helping,
Cycle. And people weren't. So I said, but we'll put the Dukes of Hazzard theming on here. Your marketing guys say you can sell, turd if you put a theming on, right? So it'll be great. And so that was the first day of the meeting. And second day I came into that meeting to find out that was not my idea, but Steve's idea. Steve's idea. And so
That happened a lot.
and that's why you had to do it. And then when it was a flop, I was so grateful that it was not my idea.
Never got released.
But still, it was a step up from rock play.
Well, actually, most of my 2600 work was done with the Magic, but when I did video pinball for Atari, I was coming from an 8080 Z80 world and character map. I had done a driving game and sold it to one of the current computer magazines, so that's how I came into Atari. So naturally, it came into an office and somebody plunked a manual in front of me, and I spent the next 2 weeks learning the 2600. Finished pinball for CES, and the after the we had to watch as the Activision boys came over to look at all the games that Atari had done, because they were newly in business. And I heard later that it had been decided that I actually did know how to program this machine, so that was a compliment from them.
So most of my experience was on one team, and we had a primary focus, which was San Francisco Rush. The first one I just worked on the last couple of weeks of Rush Rock, and after that we did something called Rush WaveNet, and I think Rush WaveNet was way ahead of its time, and I would probably say that from a working experience was one of the better things that I was able to get involved with there. Was Jeff Allen, he was in Midway, Chicago, and they had taken Mortal Kombat and they had made like an online network so that players could play Mortal Kombat, over the internet between two different arcades. Now, I never saw this actual thing working, but that was like the first thing. They said, well, the concept is great, but we want to see if an existing proven game can work over, a network connection. So they enlisted us to take San Francisco Rush and make it linkable from Los Angeles to San Francisco and San Jose, and went to Chicago too, yeah. So I think we had 500 machines between 50 arcades for this test thing, and so it was, every race was an 8-way race. That was like the coolest thing with Rush, was like if you're in the arcade and you get to play against 7 other people, real people at the same time, and it plays a special voice call. Spencer Lindsay, like, 8-way! And so, like, people would get totally engrossed in this online version of this game. It was way ahead of its time. This is 1998. And I think it was the first arcade-linked racing game ever. And even today, racing games generally don't get linked over wide area networks as much as first-person shooters. But so Jeff Allen, after this project, he went on to create Xbox Live. I mean, I think he pretty much single-handedly put Xbox Live together, but it was really his whole brainchild to do the whole concept of online gaming, and to have that experience to work with, what was later to become this whole, massively online thing. So the reason it didn't go further, we had to buy T1 lines on each arcade to make this thing work. And the T1 lines, they were paying, I think, $1,000 a month for the T1 lines. So they were like, it was popular enough to pay for the T1 lines, but it didn't make any more extra money. So that was really, I think, one of the more satisfying things. And then as far as the things that weren't so satisfying, so Neil Nicastro came in one day from Chicago and says, I really hate telling you guys this, but we've got some pressure from the investors, and we're just going to have to pull the plug on all of CoinOp. And it was a really, really, really sad day. And, you know, they said Gran Turismo is a fantastic game, and this driving team can make a PlayStation 2 game as well as you can make an arcade game. Go! And I was like, eh. And then I was there for another year before I finally left. But that wasn't the same as working on arcade driving games.
Yeah, that was a cool game. So many cool games you guys are talking about. I'd say the favorites, I got to work with Dave Ralston and John Solwitz on they just had a really run of great games. It was Paperboy, 720, and Cyberball. I thought those were awesome. I worked with Mark Cerny when he did Marble Madness. That was pretty revolutionary for its day. But of all the stories, you know, it was pretty tough to get coin-op games produced, actually. I think the kill rate was like 7-1. One game made it for every 7 that were killed. And so there's a lot of stories of, you know, walking tearful programmers out of arcades when their games weren't doing well. But there was one story. So John Farron was the president of CoinOp at the time, and he was a really cool guy. He started, he had pretty good relationships with Namco. So on one of his trips to Japan, he came back with 2 games. One was in a driving cabin. It was called Pole Position. And we had the first pole position game. It was the first driving simulator I was ever aware of, and it was awesome. And it caused a real riot at Atari. I'd say productivity was probably hit 60-70% for those 2 weeks, because we were just playing the hell out of that thing, and it was awesome. Yeah. But to get pole position, he had to take another Namco game called Minky Monkey. Yeah. And he had to buy 10,000 boards of Minky Monkey. And so it was terrible. And, you know, we tested that, and it was worth throwing out those boards to get the pole position games, because that game was really cool. I remember playing that thing so much, the first night driving home in my car, and I was driving like a maniac. I thought I was on the pole position track.
So I only worked on 2 franchises while I was at Atari, Primal Rage and San Francisco Rush, and all around, all of the games that I worked on during my time there were fantastic experiences, mainly because of the people that I worked with. And one of the best memories that I have is working on Primal Rage with the stop-motion animators. For the first one was Pete Kleinow, and he was the guy that animated Gumby so long ago. And in the sequel, we hired on John Berg, and he was the one that did a little scene in Empire Strikes Back with the AT-AT walkers, frame by frame by frame. So there were, you know, these legendary celebrities working on, you know, dinosaur stop motion, and they were just wonderful guys to work with, older guys, full of wisdom and tips and tricks, and a great work ethic. They were early, stayed late, and all I had to do was push the button on the computer to capture the frames and process them. That was my introduction to the video game industry. But Primal Rage 2 was probably the game that I disliked the most, not because of the entire process, but because of the end. And it was one of those situations where the game was in beta, was nearly finished. We were just polishing everything up, and the way that an arcade game got produced was it went out on test in the arcade and got earnings data. And you take that earnings data to the potential distributors and say, this game earns this much per week against these other, you know, other fighting games. And the problem was it didn't earn as much as Killer Instinct. And that was the new hotness at the time. And I don't know the details of it, but Primal Rage 2 did not make it to production. And everybody on the team was like, well, it's done, just sell it to somebody. And I think there were some producers trying to market it to home consoles at the time. But, you know, I moved on to San Francisco Rush after that. It was like, well, I can't do anything. I'm just the designer. It's in marketing's hands, in sales hands, and it's like, oh, they ought to do something with this. And thankfully, someone's got a prototype board out there. There's a arcade in Illinois called Galloping Ghost, and they have a Primal Rage 2 game there, fully playable. So it's a proud moment to see people enjoying a game that I worked on.
All right, so it's about 4:30 right now, and what we're going to be doing is moving to taking questions from the audience so we can squeeze you guys in for the next about 25 minutes. We're going to be ending at about 5:02 so that everybody has time to walk over to Howard's presentation, which is in the hall right next door. And Microsoft is also here. They're going to be showing a special preview of Atari Game Over, which is a documentary about the history of Atari and about the recent dig that Howard will be talking about too during his presentation. So let me move to taking questions from the audience, and what I'm going to do is position myself here, and people who want to ask, raise your hand, and then I'll call you over, and then you'll come and ask right at the microphone.
Okay. I don't know. Sorry for my English. I said every time, but can someone can talk about Pit Fighter? Because one of the first time I played at the arcade near my house, I saw the first time that game. Digitally picture of person that was a revolutionary game at that time. So,
I didn't work on it, but I'm in the background with $20 bills going like this. So I've got a Levi jacket on, and you see me going, just in the back of them like that. But yeah, it was pretty groundbreaking for the motion capture stuff. So we did a blue screen in the back, and it really didn't take that long to do the capturing. A guy named Rob Rowe did all that work, I believe, and I'm not sure if somebody else helped him. Do you guys know any of the facts on that?
I came in at the tail end of that. I did not know anything about Pit Fighter, but we had a machine there, and yes, Rob Rowe was one of the people that I interviewed with. He ran the video lab, and we had a blue screen capture setup. And I remember, I think my boss, Dennis Harper,
Oh yeah,
was in
Dennis.
Pit Fighter 2 as one of the fighters.
He also may have been in the background too. We had a few other people, and I'm trying to think of what other things I could tell you about that game. I mean, I was working on a game called Police Academy at the time when that was happening for Tengen, because I was hired to do coin-op games at Atari Games second time around, and they said, because you got consumer experience, we want you in our new consumer group called Tengen. And I'm like, what? And so while I was working on the first version of Police Academy, they said, who wants to be filmed in this Pit Fighter game? And I'm like, oh yeah, I got to check this out. So I ended up in the background. So sorry I don't really know any details on, on how it was all put together.
You know, cast member though.
That's true. IMDb, I guess that would have it, huh?
Next question. Come on.
A couple of you made reference to a game or something called Rock Fight. I've not heard this story. Can somebody elaborate on that a little bit?
He's better than I am. Howard's better than I am. Okay. All right. Well, you got to know that we were upstairs. Coin-Op was downstairs, and across from Dennis's office, which was next to the corner office, which Wade used to have, but I forget who was in at the time. Must have been George Simcock. Yeah. Anyway, across from Dennis's office was a bulletin board, and on this bulletin board, marketing would post every few months or so its requests for top 10 titles, and that's all it would be. It was just this little memo, from your marketing group, which is still small and funny, to the guys who actually do the work in this company. Would you consider making these titles? And I don't remember any of the titles except number one was always and invariably Rock Fight. which, like, oh, the creativity of this marketing guys. This is really something. And we always got a kick out of that.
So it wasn't even a game idea, it was just a title?
It was just a title that marketing kicked in. Yeah, as far as they're and we're like, yeah, that sounds fun. Okay, consider it done. The best thing that ever appeared on that bulletin board, though, was Mike Alba's memo, right? Yeah, the Rec Farm memo, the famous Rec Farm memo. Was that after your time? Yeah.
Yeah, there were occasional controversial memos that show up, but this one came up about the reg farm, and it was just and it really had the slogan. The thing was really pretty there. It says, because at Atari, their thing was, we take fun seriously. That was in a lot of their commercials and stuff like that. And so when Mike put up this fake poster and stuff, and it said,
employee advancement starts with you. Also on this bulletin board, you would get these bulletins. They said easy across the top. Employee advancement starts with you. And then it would be a list of new openings in the company that you might consider moving into, okay? So Mike Alba posted this easy document. It said easy, right at the top. It looked like a regular frickin' document, but it wasn't.
I mean, the Atari, we take fun intravenously, and then the jobs they had were like for pilot, someone familiar with twin engine aircraft and rough landings, preferably non-traceable, all these things. Chemist was required.
yeah, I think the main problem they had with we take fun intravenously was it a little too close to the truth for their comfort level.
Next question. Yes.
Did any of you guys work at all on anything linked to the 7800?
What do you want to know about the miserable 7800?
Were you guys involved at all? Did you have any contact with GCC, or was it like completely separate? Like Atari, the guys at GCC, they're the ones that did.
There was a lot of skullduggery involving the financing of GC&C on the part of Mr. Ray Kassar, and because there's probably lawyers somewhere in the world that might hear this, I don't think I'll talk about that. But what happened, in fact, was, yes, we were told, oh, well, the 5200 had come. Well, Atari had lost the thread completely, all right? When I came to work, the 2600 was a relatively new platform, but it was already sold in, 6 million or so, and it was getting kind of long in the tooth. And in the lab, and the reason I came to work for the company was we had the Atari 800 chipset with the Colleen and the Pokey, and it was a great chipset. And Doug Neubauer was building Star Raiders for it. You could see where the guys in engineering wanted to take this thing. This was a kick-ass game machine. That's what we wanted to put in your hands in 1979, folks, and you never would have known what a Nintendo was. But our marketing group decided they were going to sell it as a small business machine. You can watch Howard's film, you hear more detail about all that stuff. It was a huge marketing mistake because even today, Atari has incredible name recognition. And when you hear Atari, you don't think I'll go to work, So we didn't sell, they poisoned the well for that product completely. And at that point, it was like, well, we can't sell the 800 because it's obviously, it's our business machine. And we had a 400, which had the damn chiclet keyboard. It's a piece of garbage. No one liked it. But we can't sell that because it looks too much like an 800. We'll give away that it's not a business machine. So they repackaged it, and that's where the 5200 comes from, with those crappy controllers that break the first time you press on them
The only
hard.
mistake was the controllers, though, because 5200 was the right thing. It was taking the technology that was in the 400, 800 and making a game machine out of it.
Yes, correct. Problem. It was 2 years too late.
Well, here's another thing that, almost none of you lived through this time exactly, way back when, but when the Atari was trying to sell the 800, again, management thought it was a computer, engineering thought it was a game system, so they already had that problem. And they actually got some pushback that you won't even believe, is consumers said, what? I buy a new game machine and it doesn't play all my old 2600 cartridges? Now, you don't think that now. You think you buy a new game console, you get all new game cartridges or games, discs, whatever. And there was a time when people felt that you shouldn't do a sequel or do a new game console unless it played all of the original. So the 78 was kind of bowing to that. Of 7800 was, it will play the 2600, but it also has all this extra power. I mean, I reacted to that sentiment and I said, you still got your 2600. It's still there. Play your 2600 games on the 2600 and get new games for the new machine. And people said, no, I want to play my old games on my new machine. And it was really a period that we had to get through in the industry to start making new game consoles.
I don't agree with Dave Crane very often, okay, but I agree with him completely on this. It was bullshit, and I said so at the time. And when we designed the 5200, okay, we said in engineering, we said we're not going to bow to that kind of crap pressure. This is a different machine. It's not going to take 2600 carts. And so poor George Howard had to go through and build an adapter for that POS. And we had deliberately limited the amount of power that went out the cartridge slot. So I'm lucky to be alive today because George knew where I lived. And that's where the 7800 came from. It was kind of like this crippled up bastard thing that they could throw in there. But when you saw the Nintendo, the year before, you knew the 7800 was not competitive. It still had the same blocky graphics of the 2600. It really wasn't a big improvement. The 800, 400 was a far better machine.
I mean, the one thing that you have to remember is that Atari was really the first time people had really penetrated the market with a game machine. There were game machines before Atari, but I think Atari, the VCS, was the first one that really became spread out there, and it was the first product life cycle that had ever happened. And you got to remember, the people who were managing Atari came from Burlington. They came from big industry, had no idea what technology was, and technotainment was a whole new thing to begin with anyway. So nobody really knew what was going on. We knew we'd like to have a better machine to work on, and the 400, 800 was a great game machine that nobody could get in their head would be a game machine. But also Atari was saying, we don't want to slit our own throats. We're still making a lot of money with this 2600. And the idea that, nowadays, like the PS5 is going to be in design now that the PS4 is breaking the market. People understand the idea of a product life cycle. People didn't then. This was the first product life cycle, and that's why things kind of died. And there's one other point of clarification I think I'd like to make, because Rob has made several references to Howard's movie, and that movie is Once Upon Atari, which is available in the next presentation. I just want to make that clarification.
Amazon, I believe, also.
It's available at onceUponAtari.com. Not that anybody asked, but I'm just saying.
That's a solid plug.
I asked.
Thank you. And another thing, an interesting point of perspective is just because what Dave pointed out earlier, which was an amazing thing, is that home gaming, coin-op games were a fresh technology. Every game was state-of-the-art. We were working on a static technology. Once a platform is out there, that's it. And every year, you are farther away and farther behind the technology, and it gets ridiculous. But one thing I want to point is we did games a lot of times in 4K. It got a little bigger after that, but we did games in 2K and then eventually 4K. You have to think about that games now at 4 gig is not uncommon for a game. These games are literally 1,000,000 times bigger than the games we did. That we did games now that fit in what's the size of basically a data structure, one little unit in games that are done today.
Or an icon.
I like that. Yeah, the graphics for an icon would be more than the entire graphic setup in a 2600.
The icon on your iPhone is more memory than the entire Atari 2600 game.
Exactly. It's true. So that's an interesting point of scale, is that things have literally gone 6 orders of magnitude up in only 30 years. It's probably not even keeping up with Moore's Law.
Howard's Law.
We'll get to that one.
The iPhone 6, the top one, is 128 gigs of RAM. We had 128 bytes of RAM.
That's killing.
It's even better. We programmed in snow.
In games like Indiana Jones, so game like a Star Raiders, which required a special controller, or like Indiana Jones, where you had to use, so like Was there any pushback from management about doing, that kind of innovative setup?
Hopefully I've got a good answer for you.
There wasn't.
There was sometimes. It depends on how much you wanted to do something new and how radical it was. On the downside, if you did anything that they were afraid consumers wouldn't get, that got some pushback. Well, we're going to have to put more out there, and we're going to do that because this was pre-internet, right? So you couldn't look up hints, you couldn't look up clues, and you couldn't update your product, okay, over the web. So that was it. On the other hand, the management, a lot of people were so clueless and really didn't play games in the first place and didn't know what we were putting out. They couldn't really judge for themselves what was and wasn't super challenging. So we didn't have a lot of pushback, I think, because they really weren't aware of what we were doing for the most part. But I know with Raiders, I wanted Raiders to be an intense adventure game. But the truth is nobody was going to get it. And it brings up a really interesting point in game design. And that is like, you look at Yars versus Raiders, which for me was the big difference. And I realized that in a really well-designed action game, the designer should have no advantage over any player in the playing of that game. You should be able to have exactly the same play experience as any player. For an adventure game, the designer can never have the experience of a player. And that's a really big difference when you're making a game, right? So when you set out to make an adventure game, it's a very different thing than when you set out to make an action game because you will never have the actual experience of what it's like to play your game.
That's true for puzzle games in general.
That's true. So when you do something like that, what's really hard, like in an action game, I could just play the game and see how hard it is and how well I can do, and I'll get a good read on it. In an adventure game, I have to watch other people play it and go through that and sit through that and watch this and see how it goes and judge by that, and it's really hard to do. And you don't want to do something too simple because then the game becomes trivial and there's nothing to it, but if you make it too hard, it's tough. So we had a battle. I actually didn't want Atari to print a lot of hints because I thought, oh, you're giving the game away. What's the point? And I think there was a case where they were right because I think if that game would have gone out without hints, I don't think a lot of people would have gotten too far with it. It was hard enough to develop the damn thing in the first place.
On the issue of controllers, we actually, as you aficionados probably know, there's more than just the red button controller, right? There's the old grayscale, the gray code controller for the racing games, and the old pot controller for the paddle games. And we were actually has anyone got a copy of the keyboard controllers that you have to gang together to play basic? Oh boy, we got a real sucker here. Okay. Yeah. So there were actually a bunch of controller configurations that we were encouraged to use, but no one wanted to program for them because it meant that far fewer people would have these things. The game came with a joystick, and you knew that.
And paddles.
And paddles.
Yeah, the game came with joystick and paddles, so we could use those. But the Indy 500 driving controller, gray code controller, spins all the way around instead of hitting a stop, would have been really cool to use for a lot of games. But the only people who had them were the people who bought Indy 500, and they were Impact. So, we would look at the game and say, we could really do this with the driving controller, but then we'd have to have two versions of it. The version that has the Impact controller, the version that doesn't, and, it was just a real mess. So, yeah, extra controllers was always a problem. We were encouraged to use the paddles more often, certainly, but we weren't encouraged at all to use custom controllers or the driving controller because there'd be no way to market it.
No, but they tried to push the keypad on you too.
The keypad, yeah.
People didn't want to use the paddle controllers either. I'm going to blame Dave Remsen for that one. He's not here to defend himself. He's probably in jail somewhere.
Okay.
Do you guys know that Dave faked his entire resume?
Love that story.
Okay. Another question?
No thanks.
Dave and I were never close friends.
Really?
Really? I'm just speaking with him on the phone, I can understand why.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Since y'all, tremendous amount of talent, thank y'all for coming out. Now that I kissed your ass. Do y'all ever feel a little ripped off by some of the game developers of now that might have taken an idea or a game concept and, you know, kind of ran with it? Do you have any hard feelings or anything like that?
I'd be happy to answer that one.
Like someone's got some hard feelings here.
The exact opposite. Pitfall. My biggest success took 10 minutes to design. Ideas are a dime a dozen. All right? They have no value. It's the execution. And you can take any idea and tweak it beautifully and tweak it well and turn it into an execution that you're happy with, that is worthy of becoming a good game. And if somebody can take any idea and create a great game through that tweaking, my hat's off to them. Okay, that's a rare skill. And I don't care if they start with a game concept of one of mine. If they make a great game, more power to them. I mean, I'm perfectly happy when people do that.
And the guy on the movie said it, you know. It's a community. We stand on each other's shoulders, you know. And if people make a reference to one of my games, I'm honored, man.
So I saw a hand up.
Briefly. You know, there's an old saying in creative production, talent borrows, genius steals. So to be the source of something like that, I agree completely. It's an honor. There's no hard feeling at all.
So I think I mentioned before, one of the great things about Atari is working with the great developers. And when I started at Atari Coin-Op and I met Ed Log, one of my favorite games to play was Asteroids. And, you know, I think I'd like to mirror what these guys are saying, is that the ideas are relatively easy to come by compared to the well-executed implementation of these games. And Ed Log was a major influence in my perception of what a good game was, and I thought, you know, Millipede, Centipede, Asteroids, and also I'd like to mention Eugene Jarvis as well. These guys, you know, they demonstrated that execution was the critical component to creating a good game, and you have to play the game yourself, and often repetitively, and refine things and be, you know, aware of what's working and what's not working, and use the things that's working. Sometimes they're bugs, and elaborate on them and execute properly. But yeah, I think I'd just like to back up with everything that these guys are saying.
Yeah, the only time I've had pangs of anger would be like a poorly done sequel that was done by a company, you know, years later. I remember 20 years after Paperboy, I was at a game show, and there was a really terrible new version of Paperboy. It was called Paperboy 3D or something. It really looked bad. And I was standing behind the kid that was demoing it, and he goes, "Sir, are you familiar with Paperboy?" I said, "Young man, I am Paperboy." And I walked away.
So that's about all we have time for. Let's have a round of applause for everybody here for participating.